All right, good morning and welcome everyone to today's Back on Track session. My name is Liz Yadoff and I'll be your host for this morning's session. And just as a reminder, Iowa College Aid and ICANN are hosting these events all week to help students prepare for their post-secondary adventures. And you can find all the links to this week's sessions in the chat. So be sure to check out all the remaining sessions for the week. And so even more exciting, we're super happy to have you here and join us for the college pricing with TuitionFit session. We are excited to have Mark from TuitionFit join us today to help you learn more. Before we get started, I'm going to go over just a few housekeeping items to ensure that everything continues to run smoothly. So first and foremost, this is a Zoom meeting. So participants do have the ability to unmute yourselves at any point in time if you want to ask a question to our presenter. But we do ask that you keep yourself muted unless you're speaking, just to prevent all that background noise. Secondly, this session will be recorded, so you can ask your school counselor for the recording link anytime starting about next week. And lastly, you can unmute yourself again to ask questions at a good stopping point within the presentation, or you can type in your question directly into the chat and we'll make sure we get to it at an appropriate time. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Mark from TuitionFit to go ahead and get started. So Mark, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It's wonderful to be here joining all of you. And just to give you a little bit of a nice little secret story of how college prices got so crazy. Yeah, this is kind of a several generation or several decade story, but it's actually kind of useful to understand how things got to where they are, because I think it sort of frees everybody up to realize that they're not stuck with what looks like a absolutely bananas world of very high college prices. So to start with, just how I'm going to sort of organize this session, prices everywhere. Why? When you assume, and a way forward. Because I think at the end of this, we don't want to end up with, oh, geez, everything's a mess. There's actually a way to get out of this mess. And I want to make sure that folks know about that. So the only graph I'm going to share, we're not going to get too into the weeds here and nerd out on data, but this is really helpful to just start with. Over 20 years, the average sticker price that colleges charge, the blue line is just the tuition and fees, and the orange line includes tuition fees, room and board. So if you look at those two lines over 20 years, you think, holy crap, these prices have just gone up like crazy. And it's true, they have. They've jumped up significantly from down in the either 20s or low 30s up to close to 50,000 if you're looking at tuition fees, room and board. But here's the kicker. The average actual prices that students have paid over those 20 years doesn't do the same thing that the sticker prices do. They actually stay almost flat. And especially the net tuition and fees, the average price that students actually pay, this really stayed almost exactly the same. The tuition fees, room and board's gone up a little bit, but nothing like the sticker prices. So while we've heard the narrative that these sticker prices have gone over the moon, and the sticker prices have gone over the moon, the average actual price that students pay is not done that at all. It stayed pretty flat. Now, it's really important to dive a little bit deeper underneath these two sets of numbers, because averages are deceiving sometimes. So we've got that solid orange line, and then we've got this dotted orange line. The solid orange is the sticker prices that you see that freak you out, make you want to go hide under your bed. The dotted line is the average price that students pay. But just remember, this word average can be a little bit of a problem, because the average is, first of all, every institution puts an average price out there of all the different prices that their students pay. And then this is an average of all the different colleges. So it's an average of a bunch of averages. And in order to really understand what the average is doing, you kind of have to add some graphic here, that the actual prices that students are paying are by and large somewhere on either side of that average. So the arrow going up, the arrow going down is really where the actual prices are sitting, somewhere between about $15,000 and about $32,000, give or take, in the year 2000. So what happens as these prices, the sticker prices, go crazy and the average price doesn't really move that much? That means that the prices on either side just got way more scattered. So what has happened here is that the average prices become less meaningful because the range of prices tripled over this period of time. So now you have to think about, well, your price could be somewhere between, depending on what schools you choose to apply to, it could be down around $3,000 a year for tuition fees, room and board. Sounds amazing. Or $51,000 a year for tuition fees, room and board. And just so you know, that's where most of the prices are. But remember, these are the averages. So there's some prices down below that 3,000 and some prices way above the 51,000. All of that's happening while at the same time, the average family income for most people has kind of stayed flat. Hasn't really gone up nearly that much. So this range of prices is where we really start to run into some trouble. The other thing that has really changed is that in the year 2000, you could pretty much assume, and you'd be right, that public universities were always going to be cheaper than private colleges. And if you take the actual prices for those two groups, you see this tiny overlap, but most of the time, yeah, private schools are always more expensive than the public schools, even after the discounts. So that helps people sort of ensure that, okay, we need to find a less expensive school. We're just looking at the public institutions. Over 20 years, that goes bananas too. So that by 2020, you've got this huge overlap between public and private institutions. So you can't even really use that as a means to say, well, we're going to narrow our list to a list that's going to probably fit our price range more. Because now there are all kinds of prices at private institutions that are less expensive than the prices at public institutions. And then we're not talking about the sticker prices, we're talking about the actual prices. So what we get as a result of this is some prices are too expensive for most people. Some prices are very affordable for most people. And far more prices are somewhere in the middle, which means good for some, good for others, but not necessarily everybody. So while it's true to say that all college is actually not unaffordable for everybody, the problem is the variation in price is now extreme and the consequences are negative for everyone, because when you start looking at schools at the beginning of the process, do you know what the actual price is going to be? Yeah, you don't. And that's a huge problem. So how did this happen? Really, like, how in the world did we get to this? Because this is kind of bananas. Like, if you're running an industry and you're trying to sell stuff and get people to pay for your thing, is it really smart to make these prices sort of all over the place but totally hidden? I don't think so. And my guess is throw out all the nerd higher ed policy stuff. If you're just reasonably smart person with some common sense, you're going to say the same thing. This is not a smart way to do this. So how did this happen? Well, first of all, there's this science of enrollment management. And it's this thing that starts evolving in the 70s. And by the time we get to the 80s, it starts to be a really big deal. Before then, colleges are just like, hey, anybody, one and all, who wants to come talk to us. We're here. Whoever applies, fine. A bunch of people are going to get accepted. A bunch of people are going to come. And whatever happens, happens. But we'll be fine. Doesn't matter. But as the science of enrollment management kicks in, you start seeing schools really start to think about a sales funnel. And that means that the first phase of that funnel is about the number of students that apply to your school. So the goal now suddenly becomes really important to increase applications. And right about the middle of the 1980s, this little thing pops up called the US News Rankings, which everybody sort of knows about now. But at the time, it was a brand new idea that, well, let's rank schools. And guess what? One of the things that they used right away was how many applications does a school get? That's a proxy for how good of a school it is somehow. So the colleges thought, well, wait a minute, we want to increase our applications because that's how a sale funnel works. And we get better ranking if we have more applications. We'll say, how do we do that? How do we increase applications? We got to get tons and tons and tons of them. So this is where the science of behavioral economics kicks in. And you may not know what the phrase behavioral economics means, but essentially it's behavior and has to do with money. So think about it that way. And it turns out that human beings are not particularly rational individuals. So behavior is the sort of irrational, sort of not sort of thought through things that people do as it relates to money. Generally, when we're out shopping for things, unless we know something really, really specific about that stuff, we human beings tend to equate the price of something with the quality of it, especially if there's a whole bunch of stuff that looks about the same, right? And think about it when you go to the grocery store and you go to the bread aisle and there's bread, it's bread. Like, come on, it's bread, right? But then you see the bread that's like $5 a loaf and the bread that's 99 cents a loaf. You might be right, you might be wrong, but we presume that that $5 a loaf is artisan quality, handmade, big stone oven. It's got to be better, right? So that principle exists across lots of different marketplaces, and it's more prevalent in marketplaces where people can't really tell the difference between stuff. So that principle applied in behavioral economics has actually got a name. It's called the Chevis Regal effect. And the story basically is, and a whiskey company did this, but it's become sort of a legend. They took all the same stuff that was in that old barrel that they were charging something for. Say they were charging $5 for it. And they poured it in this really fancy container. They call it crystal decanter. And instead of charging $5 for it, suddenly they're charging $50 for it. Same liquid, exact same liquid, but now they're charging a lot more money for it. And guess what? People started paying it for the same stuff. And the company made a whole bunch of money. And so this became known as the Chevis Regal effect. So how does that apply to colleges and universities? Well, colleges thought, you know what, we need to get lots and lots of applications. Guess what? People will think our school is a way better school if they see a price tag that's super high. They don't have to worry about paying it right now because they're just thinking about applying to a place. So we'll start to put our sticker prices higher and higher and higher and say, look how high our sticker price is. That means we're really, really good because it's super expensive for all the stuff that we provide to students. So a couple of colleges did that, and guess what? They got way more applications. And as soon as that happened, the school down the road went, well, we better put our price way up there too. So suddenly lots and lots of schools, especially private colleges, started putting their sticker price, higher and higher and higher. And not too long after that, public institutions started to do the same thing with their out-of-state charges. So now you see public institutions with their out-of-state fees that look not that different from private institutions. But this started to drive the application process. And more applications was a good thing. So get more people to apply, use behavioral economics, the Chevis Regal effect, to get more people to apply to your school. It worked like a charm. But that's only half the story here, because just because you get them to apply doesn't mean you get them to come. You can even accept them, it doesn't mean they're going to come right away. So the next step was the sort of final nail in the coffin here. Make all the accepted students feel special. So suddenly the schools started going, well, we're not going to just accept you and then we have this high sticker price. There's a lot of people that are going to be scared off by that sticker price. What we'll start doing is we'll start telling you, look, you're a really special young person. You've got this talent and this other thing. So there's scholarships for you. We got money that we're going to give to students that we really like. And slowly but surely, now colleges start to figure out that to get all the applications to turn into accepted students that will enroll, we're going to focus on discounts. We're going to focus on giving students special treatment. And you start with a couple of those scholarships, and they're fairly small, but then the next school starts doing it, and then the next school starts doing it, and pretty soon you got the same keep up with the Joneses effect. So more and more schools start adding scholarships and adding discounts. And when they're competing with one or two of each other to get you to enroll after you've been accepted, that discount starts to matter. By the way, remember when I told you that the family incomes had flatlined? Remember that? They're just not going anywhere? That also starts to pull more of those scholarships out because the institutions are realizing, yeah, we got them to apply, but they still have to figure out how to pay for it. If we give them more money, then it'll look like they can possibly afford it because the price is getting closer to what they possibly can afford. So suddenly you start seeing discounts, and you see this dangerous slippery slope in higher education that pretty soon looks like this. You got discounts everywhere. So what it looks like for the consumer suddenly is like almost like a bananas sales mystery flash sale. You've probably seen this stuff where a college will say, like, come to our fall visit day and you get $1,000 scholarship if you apply, and other scholarships that are out there, like, we just accepted you and here's a free t-shirt. If you take that t-shirt on and get a picture and put it up on Instagram, we're going to give you another $500. So all of a sudden you get this crazy round of scholarships coming out of the woodwork. And yes, it coalesces around merit, it coalesces around GPA and test score, but the scholarships start to go everywhere. And now you get people who are alums endowing those scholarships. But again, you got to get them bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And so now we have this situation where the average price off the sticker price that I showed you a second ago is almost 50% off. But scholarships are out there all over the place. And this is what you end up with. Today, 9 out of every 10 college students get scholarships or financial aid. 9 out of 10 kids are not paying the sticker price. They're paying something substantially less. And the average after those discounts is half. Well, now this is bananas, right? So sticker price is useless. And everyone's looking around and say, like, who's the knucklehead who's paying full price, right? This is where this mess has gotten us, right? And it's all these different stages of colleges doing to get applications, to get enrollments. Remember this graph, though, I showed you a little bit earlier, because while we can talk about these averages of averages and the average discount and all this other stuff, for the individual student, the problem still is a different one. How do I find the schools that actually fit my budget? Because I don't want to look at a school that doesn't fit my budget and waste all my time and energy there. How do I find those schools that are going to be in my price range from the very beginning? It's still like blindfold darts. You really don't have any idea. And this is kind of the mess that we're in. And what colleges set in motion have now gotten them in a lot of trouble because they assumed a couple of things that didn't turn out very well for them. One, when you start discounting like crazy, that means the amount of money you generate off of each student that's revenue that's new money that you didn't make last year, that gets us smaller and smaller and smaller. And those of us who've ever shopped at the big box stores, which is probably most of us by now, since we've all ordered from Amazon at some point, I think, the idea there is just sell more stuff, volume, 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 right? You make less money on each sale and you just get tons of those sales. And by volume, you can actually make enough money to pay your bills and everything else. So colleges went, well, okay, how do we get more revenue after all these discounts? Well, we just increase enrollment. We get more students every year, right? So last year we had 500 freshmen. This year we're going to have 520. Next year we're going to have 540. A couple of years later, we're going to have 600. We're just going to keep growing. We're getting more and more students. You might have seen press releases that seem weird because the college is thrilled that they've got so many extra freshmen and they're living in closets and in the lounges in the dorms. And that does not sound good for those freshmen at all, but they're like, look how popular we are. We got all these students. That's what's going on underneath here, is the colleges are going, well, we got to increase salaries somehow. We got to pay the new water bill somehow. So we're going to increase enrollment. Now that presumes something, doesn't it? Yeah. So this is the problem. This presumes that there's going to be more and more students graduating from high school each year, because it's particularly, this is the case for traditional recruiting of traditional age students, right? Yeah. So in about the beginning of this 2010-ish decade, in the Midwest and in the Northeast, the number of high school seniors every year just started to flatten out a little bit. And it's kind of flattened out more and more. It was a little bump in about 16, 17, and then it kind of went flat again. And now colleges and universities have sort of figured out that if you look at the data, you can see this coming. In 2026, the number of high school graduates starts dropping. And it keeps dropping all the way through 2035, 36. Well, what happened? Oh, by the way, yeah, remember that economic disaster we had in 2007 and 8? Yeah, that one. Okay. So guess what families do when that happens? They have less kids. 18 years later, that fewer number of kids means fewer high school seniors. Colleges didn't look at that when they started down this path of big box store volume, volume, volume. But now, this is what happened over the past decade. And so, in addition to all those discounted prices, colleges have to kind of figure this out. You can't make any money off a student who doesn't enroll at all. So, in addition to the discounts, the prices are becoming negotiable. And honestly, at most colleges and universities, they're negotiating with some proportion of their students. And a lot of schools, they'll negotiate with anybody who asks for a better price. By the way, just a hint, you can use the term negotiate with a used car salesman or when you're buying a house. Yes, totally fine. For some reason, colleges are still stuck on the idea that they don't like the word negotiate, but you have to use the word appeal. So by the way, when you get to this point, you frame it as appeal. Sort of, please, sir, could you give us more? Right, that's the mindset. It's a negotiation, but just don't use that word. So tons of discounts. And when they give you a price, they're still willing to wiggle on that price. So that is kind of the why of how these prices got to be so bananas. Is there a way forward? Actually, there is. And this is a really important thing to know, because in the context of all of this murkiness about price, we actually can do some things to get around it or to see through it, if you will. So where are we now? We got college prices range from crazy high to crazy low and no way to tell which is which. But we need to tell which is which because at the very beginning of the college search process, we only want to look at the schools that are going to be in our price range. Exactly what's the point of looking at a school that's going to be $30,000 a year more than you can afford without borrowing way too much money and putting your whole future at risk? It'd be kind of nice to know that and be able to cut that out of the mess, right? So how do you find the colleges that are in my price range? There are two ways to do it now. One of them's better than the other, but they both require a little bit of flipping one key element of the college search process that has always been there that we now have to change. And that is this. For decades, the way we've done the college search is find the college that you want to go to, apply, get in, then figure out how to pay for it. Then you try to read the financial aid offer. Then you start trying to figure out how to come up with the money to pay for it. That's not a great plan anymore when the price that you could end up facing and the pressure to make it work can drive you to make decisions that you would not have made a year before, right? Those kinds of under pressure stuff is kind of why we've got the student debt problem that we've got. So there's two ways to do this. One, shop by college, or shop by price. We shop by price virtually everywhere else in the world. It's not like we shop only by price, but we use price as an early criteria to pick our list that we're going to narrow on. Versus if we shop by college, then we're just looking one college by one college by one college. So shop by college looks like this. And this is the part where we're going to bring figuring out what their price is into the mix. You can go to each college's website and find what they call the net price calculator. Now, you can use that net price calculator to try to figure out what your price would be at that college if you apply, get in, and then choose to attend. The problem here is that the net price calculators at some schools are great, super accurate, and at other schools, they're not. And you just don't know which is which. So the net price calculator can be a really good tool, but you have to know that sometimes it may not be all that accurate. The bigger challenge, though, is this means you're going to have to go to each college's website one by one. And you're never going to know what you don't know. Because my guess is all of you out here have enough of a normal life that the last thing you do is go memorize all the thousands of colleges that are out in the country somewhere, right? Like you might be able to come up with a list of 20 schools off the top of your head, but you got other stuff to do. So you don't know what you don't know. And this is what typically happens is lots of folks sort of build their college list based on the names they've heard of. And that list gets very small very fast. So if you're going to take this approach, you really do need to have some other means of picking a list of schools besides just the ones you've heard of. But you can go to each school's website one by one, use their net price calculator, and get some sense of what their price might be. And then that can help you decide, is this a school I should apply to or not? The other way to do it is to use the approach that says, I'm going to start with shop by price, which means I'm going to start by what's the ballpark sense for me and my family, or for me as a student, that is sort of my ceiling. Like, what price do I have to stay under? Now, there's different sites online that you can use to sort of help figure that out. Sometimes that's just a conversation with family. Sometimes it's a conversation with the folks you trust the most. But there's lots of ways to come to this, and it doesn't have to be down to the penny, but it's really helpful to just say, look, I'm going to try to find a school that's less than $20,000 a year, or I'm going to try to find a school that's less than $10,000 a year. For whatever reason you choose. It might be because you really have to stay within a budget because you just don't have that much money to spend on college. It might be because you're planning on going to grad school, and grad school is going to be expensive if you want to be a doctor or a lawyer. It might be because you just want to save the money so that you can use it later. Whatever your choice is, fine, but start by figuring out what's a price range that makes sense. And then the next step is to use TuitionFit.org, because TuitionFit.org is a crowdsourced data set of all of data provided by families and students around the country where they've shared the actual financial aid award letters that they've received. And the data is now organized in the same way that colleges offer prices. So you can use tuitionfit.org, come set up an account, and then decide, like, what's my price range? And then set that filter, and then you'll see a list of schools that we know are in that price range because of the data that students shared. So those are two ways to solve this problem of what otherwise is really kind of a big fog that you just don't know what you don't know. Meanwhile, you're being asked to make decisions because the college prices have really gotten to be all over the place. So with that, I think what I want to do is try to just open it up for questions. So, wow, I put the word questions in there and suddenly, yeah, perfect. Okay, awesome. This was not planned at all. I'm lying. What questions do people have? I know you can put them in the chat, or you can even just unmute yourself and ask. I'm sure that there's lots of things bouncing around in your head, but I'm glad to answer any questions people have. Anything, Liz, Tamata, that might be jumping out in your head?
Mark, this was an extremely enlightening presentation. Even for me, I feel like I have a lot of background in this area, but seeing the history and just the progression of college pricing has been, like I said, very enlightening. I don't think I have any questions at this point that would be beneficial for others, but Tamata, you're welcome to, if you have anything that you think would be helpful for students and families.
Yes, thank you so much, Mark, for that amazing presentation. I don't have any questions at the moment, but we do have a question in the chat box. Carla asked, do you put in the price before scholarships or financial aid?
Yeah, so I'm guessing that that's referring to the TuitionFit tool. And yes, the goal here with that whole effort to crowdsource this is from a consumer standpoint, what I want to know is what's the number that's going to show up on my bill, right? Like if the sticker price is way over the moon, but the actual discount's thousands of dollars less, I want to know what's the price that's going to show up on my bill. And so when we get an award letter shared by somebody, we calculate in that award letter, what's the price that's going to be on your bill? That means we include any scholarships that are merit-based awards or some other kind of money that the institution's giving you. If there's any need-based awards, if you've qualified for a Pell Grant or any state-based aid from the state of Iowa, for example, and we'll take that away from that sticker price. But sometimes in those financial aid letters, you'll see loans put in those letters. And sometimes it's not even clear what really is a loan. And the letter pretends that that's automatic money. And then they'll say at the bottom what your takeaway price is. But that's not the number that's going to be on your bill at all. The number that's going to be on your bill is going to include that money that was written in as a loan, because you're going to have to pay that back. So we throw out from the award letters anything like the plus loan, which is not guaranteed, anything like work study, which can be useful, but it's not guaranteed, because lots of schools have work study jobs that they fill with upperclassmen that freshmen don't have access to. So what we try to do is really get down to what's the real price that you're going to see. And that means, yes, taking into account the scholarships and financial aid, but putting back into the mix any kind of loans that aren't guaranteed loans that get woven into the award letters that make them hard to read.
Are there any final questions? Anything else that we can ask Mark to touch on? Feel free to put them in the chat, or you can simply unmute yourself as well. Give it just a few more seconds here in case you're typing. Looks like we did have another question come through. She asked, when should one apply for college? And then junior, question mark.
Okay. Yeah, it's a good question, because when people start hearing about how this process seems so complicated and so sort of all over the place, you start to wonder, well, should I jump on it ahead? Should I get on this right away? I don't want to wait, right? So the process of actually applying to college, like the filling out of the application process, that happens during the sort of September through, let's just say, January of the senior year of high school for a traditional student. If you're a non-traditional student, maybe you're not in high school, but sort of that beginning about a year from the time that you would start until, let's say, 9 months from the time you'd start. The process of deciding where to apply probably should start earlier than that, however, because this process, the whole sort of college admissions mechanism is something where you do have, if you choose to apply to more schools, you might use something called the Common Application, so you can apply to a lot of schools at once, but not every school uses the Common App, and so you might need to actually apply to multiple places separately. So starting the process of trying to think about, well, where should I apply, is something that you really want to spend some time doing, and that you might start your junior year. But then the actual act of applying to college, that will happen during the senior year of college. And one thing is true, you can start as early as September, but that doesn't mean you can't start applying to college later than January. There are lots of folks that apply to different colleges in the spring before they start, or even the summer before they start. And there are lots of colleges that are still looking for students, because as you might recall in this presentation, right now, there's a lot more supply than there is demand. There's a lot more empty spots in colleges than there are students filling them. So you really can apply to college anytime in that sort of senior year of high school and summer thereafter. But to make it a really thoughtful process, it makes sense to sort of start looking in the junior year and then start applying in the fall of the senior year.
Great question. Anything else? Again, we'll give it just a few moments here so you can type out your question. All right, well, I will go ahead and do our final announcements, but we still have time. So if you are still in the process of thinking of a question, feel free to type it in the chat and we will be sure to get to it before we officially end. But just as a reminder, we do have more Back on Track sessions happening this week. So please check out the link in the chat to register for other sessions that might be of interest to you. We have a lot going on, whether you're interested in looking at 2-year colleges, apprenticeships, military, 4-year colleges, and then again, anything to do with financial aid and the admissions process. We have a lot of sessions around a lot of those things. So be sure to check that out. And again, thank you to all the partners that made these events possible. You can see on the slide all of our partners that we worked together with to, again, make this Back on Track event possible. So thank you. You will have access to the recording starting next week. We'll send all the recordings to school counselors, so be sure to talk to your counselor to receive the recording. And then lastly, this Sunday is the Golden Circle College and Career Fair. It's the largest college and career fair in the state, and it is happening this Sunday from 1 to 3 in Altoona. If you're interested in learning more about this fair or attending it, the link is in the chat. And there's also, as you can see, a slide up here with more information as well. And this is just a great opportunity to network with admissions counselors and employers and get to know more about their admissions and financial aid processes. So be sure to check that out if you're in the area. And then again, thank you so much to Mark. This was an incredible presentation, great information. And we really appreciate you being here with us. And we appreciate your time. So I'm going to check the chat one last time to make sure there's nothing else in here. Let me just navigate there. It looks like we are good to go. So one final thank you. And everybody enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks for joining.